Obviously, neither the Democrats or the Republicans are too happy with this week's result. The Democrats failed to win back the Senate, and their presidential candidate performed well below expectations, while the Republicans lost their fourth straight presidential popular vote. So is it time for both parties to consider major changes? I put that to Professor John Lawrence, the former Chief of Staff for Democrat Nancy Pelosi, and Corey Mills, a Republican Party strategist. John Lawrence, the result wasn't supposed to be this close, going by the polling. How much of a shock was this to the Democratic Party, do you think?
Well, I think that it came particularly in the heels of the 2016 election. It came as a bit of a shock. I think many people thought that the pollsters had made adjustments to the technology and their methodology, and that we would get a more accurate result. Now, I will say this, there are a number of factors here that we could not have anticipated, one of them being the large absentee and early voting due to the coronavirus, and the other is a very, very large turnout that appears to have tapped into the intensity on both the Democratic and Republican sides and increased the size of the electorate in a way that polling might not have been able to anticipate. But I still think that if you look at overall numbers, if you look at, for example, the Hispanic vote, where maybe a third of that vote went to President Trump, if you look at the turnout in some of these rural areas, it was very significant. I think anybody would have to, in an unbiased way, would have to say that Trump overperformed and Democrats underperformed. And you saw that not only in the presidential, but you saw that in the loss of a lot of House seats, which was not anticipated in the pre-election run-up.
Corey Mills, Donald Trump's all about winning big. So why didn't he, as the incumbent president, win in a landslide?
Well, I think that as a whole, one of the things that I noticed is that there was a lot more digital media ad campaigning as there was to more of the traditional television ad campaigns. I definitely saw on a lot of the more conservative media outlets where there was a tremendous amount of Biden, Harris campaign ads. Certainly, we saw a lot of the different groups like the Lincoln Project come forward trying to denigrate the president himself. And again, these are all good lessons that, we need to start thinking about, how we canvass and how we expand the map. These are all very important things. I think that, while we didn't do very well, or I shouldn't say very well, we didn't do as well as we may have wanted to within the presidential campaigning effort, I think that it did see a favored result with regards to Senate and congressional races, where we've picked up numerous seats in the House, and we've also maintained control over the Senate for the next 6 years.
John, much has been made about the Democrats being somewhat fractured, that there's a large progressive base which has been shunned as the party snubs leftist candidates and policies. Now, given two successive underwhelming presidential elections and the increasing amount of Americans supporting progressive policies, isn't it time the Dems shift left?
Well, I don't think the Democrats can afford to shift too far left, or they start losing their appeal to the center. And it's where in the center that we win these elections. We're not going to win a lot of elections in some of these frontline congressional districts or frontline states by shifting too far to the left. I think what you're pointing out, however, is a problem that the Democrats do face in that it is unlike the Republican Party. It remains an ideologically somewhat heterogeneous party, and the base, just as the Republican base, is quite ideologically on one side of the scales, but the ability to win districts, and particularly win districts that add up to a majority, both with electoral votes and with congressional districts, depends on their continuing to be able to make an appeal to the center. That's the dynamic within the Democratic Party. It's going to take some time to work that out. And certainly there are a lot of new people coming into the party who are very progressive. I would just point this out. A lot of the folks that commentators point to as illustrating the future of the Democratic Party and the left of the Democratic Party, they represent safe Democratic districts. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they come from districts that are strong Democratic districts. We've already won all the strong Democratic districts. That's not where you're going to put together a majority party with respect either to the House of Representatives, the Senate, or the president, the next presidential race. So we have to figure out how to accommodate those disparate factions within the Democratic Party to be successful.
Now, this is the fourth straight election the Republican presidential candidate lost the popular vote. What does that tell you about how Americans feel about Republican conservative policies? And is this a trend the GOP should be concerned about?
One of the things that people have to understand and why the Electoral College is so important is that if we wanted to just look at majority voting or popular vote, then that means that a candidate could essentially only go after, say, LA County, New York City, Chicago, and all of these different areas could compile to about, say, 17 million votes in total. So our framers understood that the only way that the minority voice and that all voices from each group and each idea could basically come together was to enforce this electoral vote. I'm not worried about necessarily the popular vote or the majority vote. What I am worried about is the Electoral College that our framers put in place to ensure that it allows each candidate to expand the map and not simply focus on what the popular decisions are for the highly populated areas.
What other lessons do you think the party can learn from this? And how different will the candidate and platform be in 2024?
You know, I don't see the nation and the standard political parties falling back to the way things were pre-Trump. I think a lot of people are aware of what's at stake. I think that a lot of the Republican Party has been awoken. I think that a lot of your politicians who are, Republicans in name only, but really haven't been willing to get into the fight, will phase out. I think that we may see something very similar to the 2010 switch, where almost 87 seats were overtaken in the House by the conservative Tea Party. So I think that you will see a shift. I think that more Republicans need to be willing to get into the fight, and if not, they need to be willing to get out of the way.
Well, I think it's a little early. I'm not sure we've learned all the lessons of 2020 before we go to 2024. But, I think it's pretty clear that Democrats are going to build a constituency around issues like health care, around protecting voting rights, which I think will only become more important when, in the aftermath of this election, the House passed a Voting Rights Extension Act, the John Lewis Act, which the Senate has refused to take up. I think that Democrats will continue to push on issues like child care and preschool. They'll continue to talk about tax equity and income equity. And those are issues that I think, for the most part, the party can rally around. The issue for the United States is that you have parties that look to be, in many cases, in rough parity, but that are ideologically largely unified and very, very distinct. And what we really have to do is to figure out ways to cross the aisle and develop the kind of collaborative bipartisanship that marked American politics until really the last 25 or 30 years. That's very tough to do, because those parties and the voters in those parties tend to punish people who reach across the aisle. So we're in a difficult place in the United States politically, and I don't think that the outcome of this election changes that terribly for either party.